Okay, now we're gonna do something a little different. We were going to have Michael Droback speak from the Small UAV Coalition by himself, but we're actually going to have some of his associates also speak. It's kind of funny, you know. Some people think I'm just a griper or a complainer, but in the beginning, I talked to these guys when they started up, and they were like, "Hey, we're going to do this. We're going to get Congress motivated. We're going to have the White House is going to put out statements. They're going to say things." And I was like, "Yeah, right. I haven't heard that before in my 12, 13 years of doing this." Some guy rides in, we're going to have this fixed in 2 weeks. Show me. And that's exactly what I said. And about 6 months later, you know, we started seeing Congress was like, "Hey, we got to do something about this drone problem. These guys over here at the FAA are just, you know," I'm not going to say anything negative. Anyway, and then the White House said some stuff about the drone. So, you know, I was the first to commend them for their work because they actually seem to be doing, let's say, effective advocacy, expressing the needs of this community to the Congress and the White House. So please welcome the Small UAV Coalition folks. And they're on stage. Test. Okay. And you guys can share this one.
That's great. Well, thank you so much. And again, thank you to Patrick and all that went into creating this incredible event. We're thrilled to be here, and we are constantly following Patrick on Twitter and everything that's going on. And we're afraid of what's to come in the future. So we're going to continue the hard work. But, you know, the truth is that there are so many different groups that are involved in what's been happening of late. And certainly we are thrilled to be a group amongst many, and some that have been doing it for a long period of time before us. Certainly timing matters a great deal in what you're doing. I'd say where we are unique and kind of how we view this environment, great, is that we may be the first uniquely commercial and recreational voice in this market. So, you know, the AMA and AVSI do a great job representing niche voices. And I think there was a need, based on what we heard from members that were coming to us, asking us to get involved, to capture that recreational, the consumer, and the commercial voice. And again, this is all going to be a process, a growing process. It's going to be you know, incremental steps that will lead to, I think, progress that will change the way consumers are living, will change the way commerce is done, and will lead us to a place where one day we don't know how we actually got to the place we are today, where we live without them. I think we're going to see the use of drones at scale across every sector of the economy. There's going to be ubiquity. It's going to be safe, and it's going to be something where people in this room are now saying, why aren't we there today in the U.S.? Because, for example, other countries are way ahead of us. What's great about the membership of the Small UAV Coalition, and again, it continues to grow, is that there is a real desire not only to captivate consumers on the recreational front, so those who are out there operating and doing so responsibly, they are excited about the potential, just about what they can do in their spare time. And that's something that I think is lost in this discussion about a move to commercial. So we represent the software, hardware manufacturers, some of the insurers are involved, some of the educators are involved. So you'll see from our membership, we've got everyone down the line, from the kind of commercial entities that are looking at delivery to the recreational entities that will be involved in commercial, from 3DR, DJI, Parrot, the Googles and the Amazons' aspirations for delivery. You go across to those that are in, we just heard from Jono, I think it was a great presentation about what the capabilities are going to be around data. I mean, again, the companies that are part of this coalition are going to be driving the future of commerce. And so that is an incredible voice. And what we started to do is have this discussion before Congress, and what we saw was members of Congress, regulators, policymakers, thought leaders were absolutely engaged. Their view was, wow, we didn't know that companies kind of this ilk were as involved in this industry as they are. We're listening. And, you know, it doesn't mean that the people that are involved in the military industrial complex or those that are hobbyists are less important. It means that there's just another constituency that is bringing voice to a lot of the same things that have been at least on the legislative and regulatory menu for quite some time. It's bringing a new energy and excitement to it. So we're thrilled to be representing this group of members, and I can't tell you, having come off a board meeting with them yesterday, about the level of passion that they have and the level of sophistication on these issues. So we're thrilled to have them. Our mission is very simple, which is aggressive advocacy, in quotes, as Patrick likes to call it. We like to call it, education. So we're out there promoting the commercial, civil, philanthropic, and the use of small UAVs or drones for any number of interdisciplinary purposes. We're trying to demonstrate how important it is, what the impact will be on the economy, how it's going to change consumers' lives. And I think this is something that is beginning to pick up traction when you talk about search and rescue, disaster management, delivery. We can go on and on about precision agriculture and closed-set filmmaking and inspections and surveying. There are very few things that we shouldn't be thinking about drone use for in terms of how our economy functions. And I think we're going to see this, it's going to create incredible efficiencies. And so part of doing that is also then looking at what's the pathway from where we are today to this incredible usage that we're going to see. And I think part of that is just promoting and thinking about a paradigm and a system that's going to allow for us to get especially the U.S. regulators and U.S. policymakers and the commercial space to the right set of responsibilities and obligations. And again, this is something that we're doing in the U.S., but we're also in coordination with all of our colleague companies, associations, and groups internationally as well. And now I'm going to move to Greg Walden, who's been helping us lead the front at the FAA.
Thanks, Michael. All of you know that the comment period closed on last Friday and that the reports are more than 4,000 comments. And many of you think the FAA is not going to get a final rule out till end of 2016 or 17. That may be the case. But consider that most people think also that the final rule will only confine operations to within the visual line of sight. But in the preamble to the proposed rule, the FAA invited comments on whether beyond visual line of sight operations may be authorized in this rulemaking or a future rulemaking. And many of the comments, including comments from the Small UAV Coalition, say to the FAA, yes, you can authorize BVLOS operations right now in this rulemaking under certain circumstances, certain operational parameters, and perhaps with certain technologies. Also, the micro-UAS option was not proposed by the FAA. And so some say, well, maybe it has to be done in a subsequent rulemaking. What? We're not going to have micro-UAS operations until 2018 or 19? No. The FAA flagged the micro-UAS option in the proposed rule, not in the proposed rule, but in the preamble. And the comments so far are heavily in support of a micro-UAS option. The FAA was specific enough in flagging the micro-UAS option that, yes, that can be in the final rule. What the Small UAV Coalition and many commenters from across the industry recommended to the FAA is that they move off of categorical prohibitions in the proposed rule, like no operations except during the day, and no more than one operator, no more than one UAV per operator. Move away from the categorical prohibition, maybe that's the presumption, but allow for operations at night with appropriate parameters approved by the administrator. And not just the Small UAV Coalition, and AUVSI is making those recommendations. AIA, the Association of Aircraft Industries, making those recommendations. Boeing is making those recommendations. We have a aligned interest throughout the small UAV and the large UAV industry to move the FAA away from categorical prohibitions to approved by the administrator. And the hard work for us is to convince the FAA that we can come up with standards and metrics to authorize those nighttime operations, those multiple UAVs per pilot, and yes, those beyond visual line of sight operations.
Just to kind of capture other issues that are going to be addressed, and certainly we filed comments with the NTIA after the presidential memorandum focusing on privacy. no one can be dismissive of privacy in this day and age of new technology. On the other hand, what we have found is that, in terms of desktop computing, in terms of mobile technology, there hasn't been a real silver bullet to tackle consumer concerns and expectations. So to say that there is something uniquely invasive about an aerial vehicle, certainly there are issues that have to be addressed, and we've put through the comments to the NTIA, and we were working closely with NTIA and have been both before and after they had their request for comment. I would say this. Privacy is of the utmost importance to all of the members of the Small UAV Coalition. I think it is to all of the members of this ecosystem. But I'd say that it is something that is pervasive throughout technology generally, which is if there is technology that has the capability of capturing images, of capturing data, where this data can then be untangled and identify a person, then you've got a concern. And so whether it's aerial or terrestrial, I think that these are issues that have to be addressed with technology generally. That's how we approach our comments. Certainly with the knowledge test centers, there's going to be an opportunity to, through the FAA knowledge test centers, I think there's going to be an opportunity to advise users, both on the commercial and consumer front, about what good stewardship of technology really means. And it's never possible to completely ferret out bad actors, but it is possible to put a program in place to educate people about how to use technology and use it responsibly.
Just a few comments on the Section 333 process that was in the Modernization Act of 2012. We've recommended to the FAA that they take what is in the proposed rule and adopt it to the Section 333 process. That would not only open the airspace to more operations, but also speed up the Section 333 process. We successfully pushed the FAA to adopt somewhat of a Me Too rule so that a petitioner can come in and say, hey, I'm going to do what that other company is doing. I'm going to comply with your terms and conditions. And why do we need to go through a public notice and comment process? Just issue the exemption. And the FAA has issued over 160 exemptions in April alone. So they really picked up the pace. I'm sure Jim Williams said that about this earlier. But they need a lot more expedition because there are over 200 petitions filed in April. So even with 160 grants, they're still falling behind.
The thing that we have been very successful in doing, and again, it's not the people on the stage, it's the members of the Small UAV Coalition, is that they're investing a lot of their time in having dialogue and educating lawmakers. And what we found is nothing but an unbridled support for the industry, to the extent that it's rare that you feel like you have the access to the process in Washington where you're not merely an observer, but you're a participant. That's a real distinction, being a participant. And we've been asked with the folks that are currently working on FAA reauthorization to help chart their course and how they would authorize a enhanced view of kind of what the commercial and recreational space will look like, how we can provide some guidelines so that the U.S. doesn't continue to fall behind other nations in the adopting this good technology. So we expect to see an incredible amount of progress by the U.S. Congress in saying we can't wait until there's a final rule by the FAA. We have to move forward expeditiously, and that may mean that we give the FAA some guidance through the FAA reauthorization in October. So we're very optimistic that there's going to be potentially a whole new title on unmanned aircraft systems in the FAA reauthorization that tells the FAA, until you come up with a final rule, there is going to be this approach to commercial and recreational use of UAVs. No. Go ahead. That's what we just covered. Yeah, you go ahead.
Okay. So spectrum is another area that we've been working on for the Small UAV Coalition. And as I'm sure you all know, UAVs use spectrum for all different purposes. So for the control link, for collision avoidance, for telemetry, diagnostics, payload communications. So we've been working through what are the right solutions for small UAVs versus larger UAVs, and this is an area where size truly does matter. And so for the Small UAV Coalition, we've really been looking at using the commercially available licensed and unlicensed networks and not using aviation protected spectrum, which is maybe more appropriate for larger UAVs at different altitudes. I think we're getting good traction on that. I think we've had really good dialogue with both the FCC and the FAA on that. They're not completely aligned yet in their understanding of how that might occur. And so there are probably a few things that need to happen. Studies need to be done about the efficacy of using commercial networks and how you might separate your aerial communications from your terrestrial communications in order not to have collision in your network and interference. We need carrier support, and I think Verizon's been out there. They've been really vocal about wanting to be involved in this space and having UAV users as another data user on their network. So that's great. Very recently, the CTIA, the Wireless Association in Washington, D.C., came forward and filed in the FAA rulemaking saying, we think that commercial wireless networks have a lot to offer the UAV industry. So I think that's really exciting. But ultimately, we'll probably need to have some action at the FCC. We're not sure what form that's going to take. It may be that we need some clarification that the spectrum bands can truly be used for aerial communications. There's no prohibition on it presently in the table of allocations, but it's also not specifically authorized. So there might be something we have to do there. It may also be that the FAA has something to say to the FCC about what needs to be in the rules with respect to these spectrum bands in order to enable them for UAV use. But apart from the commercially available networks, just this week, day before yesterday, the FCC released both an order and a notice of proposed rulemaking. These were bands that were approved for use through the World Radio Conferences from 2007 and 2012, so it takes a really long time for things to happen. But the FCC released an order and an NPRM allocating spectrum, let me see here, it's from 960 to 1164 for UAV use. We don't have service rules yet, so that's another thing that we need to begin working with the FCC on, but it's just for line of sight communications, and so I think that might be an item that really needs serious consideration. And then there's an additional band they're looking at, 5030 to 5091, and allocating that for UAV use domestically. Those bands are internationally harmonized, so that's great. They came through this World Radio Conference process, so I think that's a real positive. I think the final area where we've been working is in sort of higher bands, millimeter wave bands, because in some of those bands in the 76 to 81 gigahertz, they're used for vehicular collision avoidance on the ground for automobiles. And can you take that technology and put it in the air, which is a really interesting idea. And Rockwell Collins just filed something in that proceeding suggesting that perhaps airborne use could be possible. So these are all the kinds of things that we're working on behalf of the Small UAV Coalition. Happy to take questions or, have an offline discussion with any of you about spectrum if you have questions.
So just finally, because it sounds like Patrick's going to kick us off the stage, which we'll fight for the microphone, Patrick. I think one of the things that we think is important about this is that, it's incredible when we have leaders such as Patrick and all of the attendees of this conference. Messaging, the narrative, how we are talking about these issues is as important as what we say. I mean, I'm not, it's about getting the right kind of culture around this community. Around the people who are using it for recreational use, consumers that are actually falling in love with this. It's important that we are looking at the efficiencies it's going to create in the economy, and it's important that everyone here goes out and uses these conferences and the companies that are getting involved, the consumers that are loving it, and begins to spread the word. Because I think what we are finding is that there are more people now that are beginning to see drone use as beyond just the military, beyond just the kind of the old school hobbyists, and seeing it now as something that's being done every day by both their children and by their grandparents, and that's something that's very exciting. And I think one of the things that I've seen in my career, both in-house and working in the legal area, is that with any new technology, having opened the office for Netflix, having worked in Expedia, having worked for IAC that owned Ticketmaster and a bunch of other innovative companies, what I'm finding is that consumers want new technology. They love it. And they love something that will excite them as well as make their lives easier. The bottom line is technology always wins. I mean, it's something that everyone believes. It may take time, and there are roadblocks that are thrown up all the time. People in this room have really a responsibility. it's incumbent upon us to talk about what the benefits are, how consumers will gain, what the excitement is and the passion is around this industry. And so I put it to everyone here. It's our responsibility to ensure that technology continues to always win, and it will. So thank you so much.